Okay, so we're back. We've got our ball bouncing along. It's going across to the right. That's all well and good, but we want it to start stretching. So what we're going to do, we're going to come along and set keys. So I'm just going to hit S at each of these keys that we've got along here. You'll notice that it's adding in keys on our translate, which we will get rid of in a moment. We're going to do that by just selecting all those and hitting delete. Now we've got keys on everything else, which is what we want at this stage. And so when the ball comes down, we want it to squash. And so if you grab your scale, you can squash it down like that, where we're going to plug in a value of 0.7. And so what happens is the ball will squash when it hits the ground. But if we go over to our scale Y and just hit F to frame it up, you'll see that we've got this long interpolation which is just not helping us at all because it's squashing in the wrong places. So what we want to be doing is actually stretching it in the opposite direction. Now if you look at a whole heap of reference material into bouncing balls and whatnot, you'll see that to get that really elastic look right before the ball hits the ground, it'll actually stretch out. And this isn't technically correct in terms of the world of physics, but it looks nice. And animation is all about doing what looks nice as opposed to what is technically right. So we're going to come over here and inverse that value. So I'm going to put in 1.3. And if we come back down to our graph editor and hit F, you'll see that we have this wild sort of change in our graph, which still doesn't look very good when the ball is actually bouncing. So if we come back to frame 8 and we make that a normal shaped ball, then we start getting that nice sort of stretching right before the hit and then the compression. And now what we want to do is just invert that. So if we put in the values of 1.3 again, where it stretches out, and then a couple of frames later, we bring it back to 1. And now if I just scrub through that, you'll see that's a much nicer action. It's got a bit of squash in there, adds a little more character to the actual ball bounce. So this is what we want to do across all of them. So I'm going to go over here, and so that's where the ball's hanging in the air, so we don't want to do anything there. We come back down, this is where it hits the ground next. So we're going to put in a value of, let's go with 0.8 this time. And again, if we go a frame back and then put in the opposite of 0.8, which is 1.2, and then frame after it, put another 1.2, and then if we go to a few frames back, and then just don't key in 0, or you'll do what I've just done and make a pancake. Now, this is something that I tend to do a lot, so if you do see a pancaked ball, that is why. So I'm going to redial that in as 1, and we get our nice looking ball again. And come across here, put in 1 again. I might actually pull this key over here at 28 in a little closer, so I just hold down Shift and click, and it highlights the key, and I can then drag it. And so that's giving us another little squash there, and then we'll come down to our next keyframe at the ground and type in, what are we up to? We're up to 0.9 now. I'm slightly decreasing the squash each time because the ball is starting from a lesser height, so it's not going to squash as much. And so come over here and go 1.1 and 1.1 and key in a value of 1 and 1, and you'll see the pattern kind of repeating itself. And I'm just going to go through this quickly because this is the same thing as what I've just been doing. So I'll go to 0.95, 1.05, 1.05, and then values of 1, and then that should be about what we're looking for. And so now you'll see that we've got a much more characterful ball because of the slight compression that it's getting each time it hits the ground. Now, this is, if you scrub along, there's, I think it's this bounce here that I'm not particularly happy with. It's this last one, because there's a bit of a jelly wobble bounce there. Now this, as you get further to the end of your bounce, it's always going to be more difficult because, as you see, I'm setting a key on every single frame, and that means that I'm actually really restricted into what sort of animation I can do. So what I might do is just, if I select all of those keys there and hit the R key, which is the scale tool, I can actually scale inside the graph editor. Middle mouse and drag, I can actually scale within the graph editor. And so I just want to make that as minimal as possible. And that's looking much nicer now. So, but you'll notice another problem that's starting to occur, which is the ball isn't actually maintaining its volume. Now this is very important in terms of animation. It was a key concept with 2D animation because the shapes could be so amorphous. To keep things looking correct, you need to make sure that they maintain volume. So what's going on here is when it squashes, it's losing volume, and when it stretches, it's actually gaining it. So what we could do is go through and the scale Z and X, because this is at 0.3, we'll go through and change, I'm just control clicking both of them, change that to 0.7, and there we get the volume is maintained for the ball, but that would require me to go through and change this at every single keyframe that I've set so far. And if I want to go back and change that, I'm going to have to change everything. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit Control Z and undo that so that I get my values back. And I'm going to show you what lazy people do to get this done much more easily in the next video.